This is Judges chapter 8. We need to remember that in the beginning, Gideon raised his army from 4 tribes, and Ephraim wasn't one of them. He called on Ephraim after the fact to cut off the fords, which they did. Now Ephraim has met up with Gideon, and they've brought the heads of the Midianite princes Oreb and Zeb with them. Verse 1. The men of Ephraim said to him, "Why have you treated us this way that you didn't call us when you went to fight with Midian?" They rebuked him sharply. He said to them, "What have I now done in comparison with you? Isn't the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has delivered into your hand the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. What was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger was abated toward him when he had said that. Comment: The Ephraimites are offended because Gideon didn't call them to the original fight. But Gideon told them the leftover grapes of Ephraim were better than the best wine of his own household. In other words, they don't have any reason to feel inferior, and they should give the little guy a chance to shine every now and then. Besides, he says, you killed Oreb and Zeb. I didn't do anything in comparison with you. The joining of a just cause is as honorable as starting it. Verse 4. Gideon came to the Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men who were with him, faint yet pursuing. Comment: as we'll find out in a moment, Gideon and his 300 have come to the town of Succoth on the other side of the Jordan. It's on the border between the tribe of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh. This is about 40 miles from where they attacked the Midianite camp in the Jezreel Valley. They've been chasing the Midianites all that way, much more than a marathon, going as fast as they can. So as it says in verse 4, Gideon and the 300 men with him were faint yet pursuing. Verse 5. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The princes of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon said, "Therefore, when Yahweh has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars." Comment: this is the opposite of the situation with the Ephraimites. The Ephraimites complain they didn't help enough, and the men of Succoth don't want to help at all, even with bread, even when the Midianites are in retreat. On top of that refusal, they gave Midian an insulting answer, as if Gideon weren't really trying to catch up with the kings, or as if he wouldn't be able to defeat them. Gideon promised retribution. Coming up just a little farther down the road, Gideon comes to the town of Penuel, verse 8. He went up there to Penuel and spoke to them in the same way. Comment: he's asking for bread for his 300. Still in verse 8. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered. He spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower." Comment: Gideon has promised the men of Succoth and Penuel that when this is over, he'll come back to deal with them. Verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the army of the children of the east. For there fell 120,000 men who drew sword. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbeah, and struck the army, for the army was secure. Comment: the kings of Midian have 120,000 dead and 15,000 remaining. They've lost 90% of their army. What's left is resting at Karkor. As it says, they thought the army was secure, meaning they thought they were safe. They didn't think Gideon would follow them so far, but he did, and he struck them. Verse 12. Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them. He took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and confused all the army. Comment: he confused all the army, meaning once again they went into a panic, and he routed them. Verse 13. Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle from the ascent of Heres. Comment: he finished striking the Midianites, took Zebah and Zalmunna captive, and he's on his way back to the 2 towns that refused to help. Verse 14. He caught a young man of the men of Succoth and inquired of him, and he described for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Comment: he's got a list of the elders of Succoth. He told them in verse 7 he would tear their flesh with thorns and briars. Verse 15. He came to the men of Succoth and said, "See, Zebah and Zalmunna, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary?" He took the elders of the city and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. Comment, he taught them, meaning he taught them a lesson. He might have even killed them. Now on to Penuel, where they also insulted him and refused to help. Verse 17. He broke down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Comment, he killed them. Gideon was on a holy mission, and they insulted the mission rather than participating. So why did he kill the men of Penuel and not the men of Succoth? Their crimes were equal. They both refused to help and both insulted him. In verse 8, the men of Penuel answered him in the same way as the men of Succoth, no difference. So why the unequal treatment? The text doesn't give or suggest any explanation. It might be that Gideon actually did kill the men at Succoth when he, quote, taught them a lesson, end quote, with the thorns and briars. He also tore down the tower in Penuel. A tower is a defensive fortress like a safe room to which people can flee in case of attack. It would be the most valuable and expensive structure in town, so the tearing down of it was another retaliatory measure on top of killing the men. If we can't understand the justice in what Gideon did, maybe it's because we underestimate the importance of adding material support to the causes of God. Now coming up, Gideon will ask the two kings about an incident that occurred at Mount Tabor, which is in the Jezreel Valley where the battle started. It turns out that Gideon had some brothers on the battlefield with him, and they were killed. Verse 18. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor?" They answered, "They were like you. Each one resembled the children of a king." He said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As Yahweh lives, if you had saved them alive, I would not kill you." Comment, Gideon and his brothers came from a humble family, the poorest in Manasseh, Judges 6:15, but they had a regal appearance. Gideon was sincere when he said he would spare the kings had not they killed his brothers. He swore to it by Yahweh's name. In the same way, you and I are humble Christians, but we belong to a royal family, 1 Peter 2:9. Romans 12:19 tells us, quote, "Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God," end quote. Gideon is an agent of God here. He'll take vengeance on God's behalf for the killing of his brothers, like God will take vengeance on those who martyr his saints. Now coming up, Gideon will give the command, verse 20. He said to Jether, his firstborn, "Get up and kill them." But the youth didn't draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was yet a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise and fall on us, for as the man is, so is his strength." Comment, there was nothing but fear stopping the boy from killing the kings. His father was standing right there by him. God stands right by us, and there's nothing stopping us from doing whatever he commands us to do. The boy wouldn't do it, so the king said to Gideon, "Kill us yourself." Still in verse 21. Gideon arose, then killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescents that were on their camels' necks. Comment, he stripped them of their lives and their royalty. All God's enemies will be brought to nothing. Now coming up, the men of Israel want to make Gideon king. Verse 22. The men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son's son also, for you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. Yahweh shall rule over you." Gideon said to them, "I do have a request, that you would each give me the earrings of his plunder." For they had golden earrings because they were Ishmaelites. Comment, the man Ishmael and the man Midian were both sons of Abraham. Their descendants were desert dwellers, Genesis 21:21, 25:6, and Exodus 3:1. This accounts for the mixing of their descendants in the desert and the conflation of the terms Midianite and Ishmaelite in this verse and in Genesis 37:28 in the description of the traders that bought Joseph and took him to Egypt. Apparently the Ishmaelites wore gold earrings. If each of them had one, that makes 135,000 gold earrings among the plunder. Verse 25. They answered, "We will willingly give them." They spread a garment, and every man threw the earrings of his plunder into it. The weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, in addition to the crescents and the pendants and the purple clothing that was on the kings of Midian, and in addition to the chains that were about their camels' necks. Comment, that's about 53 pounds of gold from the earrings, which is about $1.5 million worth at today's prices, plus all the other items mentioned. Regarding the gold, verse 27, Gideon made an ephod out of it. Comment, an ephod is a holy garment or vest worn by a priest. The high priest of Israel wore one made out of linen with some gold threads woven into it, Exodus 39:2 and 3. But the ephod Gideon made seems to be of pure gold, not for wearing or ministering, but just for display. Gideon, going on now, still in verse 27, put it in Ophrah his city. Then all Israel played prostitute with it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his house. Comment, all Israel, including Gideon and his family members, played the prostitute with it, meaning they worshiped the golden ephod. Quote, it became a snare to Gideon. Verse 28, so Midian was subdued before the children of Israel, and they lifted up their heads no more. The land had rest 40 years in the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Comment, Jerubbaal is Gideon. He went home. Verse 30. Gideon had 70 sons conceived from his body, for he had many wives. His concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. Comment, Gideon had 70 sons and one particular son in Shechem by a concubine, which is a female servant. We need to remember that the servant's son in Shechem is Abimelech. Verse 32. Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon was dead, the children of Israel turned again and played the prostitute, following the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. The children of Israel didn't remember Yahweh their God, who had delivered them out of the hand of all their enemies on every side. Neither did they show kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, according to all the kindness which he had shown to Israel. Comment, back to square one according to the pattern during the period of Judges. Idolatry, then Yahweh bringing in foreign plunderers, then Israel crying out again to Yahweh, then Yahweh giving deliverance by a judge, then back to idolatry again, Judges 2, verses 11 through 20. That's the chapter. Judges 9 will give the history of Gideon's son Abimelech at landofhavilah.net, Judges 9. This is the map of Judges 8. Gideon crossed the Jordan in pursuit of Zebah and Zalmunna and what was left of their Midianite troops. He came to Succoth, which was at the junction of the Jabbok and Jordan rivers, and Penuel on the Jabbok close to the Jordan. He went through unknown locations east of the Jordan, chasing them down, and came back to Succoth and Penuel. Then he went home to Ophrah in Manasseh, about here. Judges 9 is next.